Look at this review from our friend Laura. She told us that 240 was an incredible asset that was affordable and propelled her to passing scores on her certification exams. Laura's comment pushed us to make this video that will help you unlock the foundations of reading exam. My name is Terry and I work for 240 to help teachers pass their certification exams. And today I'm going to help you. This video is going to prepare you for the foundations of reading exam, which is test code 190. This video is going to cover 3 things: what's on the test and how to study for it, the most important key concepts that you'll want to know, and we're going to go through a few practice questions at the end. All right, ready to get started? Perfect, me too. Let's get to it. Now, the foundations of reading consist of 4 sub areas: foundations of reading development, development of reading comprehension, reading assessment and instruction, and integration of knowledge and understanding. The exam includes 100 multiple choice questions which come from the first 3 sub areas and 2 constructed response questions which come from the last sub area. A constructed response question, or CRQ for short, is like an essay. On the foundations of reading exam, you'll see them referred to as assignments. I know having to write essays as a part of your exam may seem nerve-wracking, but I have some good news for you. All the content you need to know for your CRQs is covered in the first 3 sub areas. So by the time you get to the CRQs, you'll just need to apply that previous knowledge into a clear, coherent response. Check it out. The CRQs even match the names of the first 2 sub areas. Let's go through the multiple choice sub areas first, and then we'll finish up with the CRQs. Sub area 1 is called Foundations of Reading Development, and it's worth the largest portion of your exam at 35%. That makes sense because it covers everything you need to know about, well, laying the foundation for students to be successful readers. You'll see questions about emergent literacy skills, including phonological and phonemic awareness, concepts of print and the alphabetic principle, beginning reading skills, including phonics, high-frequency words and spelling, word analysis, including syllabication, morphemic analysis, and orthographic skills, and reading fluency at all stages of reading development. Wow, that was a lot. No wonder this sub area is worth such a big piece of your exam. Let's go over something that you absolutely have to know. Phonological awareness is an umbrella term that includes the ability to hear words, syllables, and sounds in spoken language. It involves the understanding that words can be broken into parts. Phonological awareness typically develops in a simple to complex progression. Students move from rhyming and alliteration to phonemic awareness skills. Phonemic awareness is sometimes confused with phonological awareness, but it is actually a subcategory of phonological awareness. And phonemic awareness has its own simple to complex progression of skills, from phoneme isolation up to phoneme substitution. Now, that was just a small portion of that huge sub area. But wait, there's more. Under morphemic analysis, you'll need to know how to teach students to break words into parts, called roots or base words, and affixes, which are either prefixes or suffixes. Prefixes and suffixes modify root words. Let's see this in action. Let's look at the word accept, which is to agree to take something. That can be a root. If we add the prefix un, that flips the meaning. Now, if we add the suffix able, that changes the overall word to an adjective. On your exam, you might be asked to select a word that morphemic analysis would work on. Let's try a fun one. On which one of these words would you use morphemic analysis? The answer is disbelief, because you can break the word into a prefix dis and the root belief to understand that the word means, I can't believe I got this shirt on sale. It looks good, right? 2 key concepts is all I'm really able to get into when it comes to this foundations of reading development section. But remember how many concepts are in this sub area? We went over phonological and phonemic awareness and morphemic analysis, but there's still a ton of other information you have to know for your exam. The good news is, we got you covered with our 240 study guide. Let us help you out. Click the link below and subscribe today. Okay, on to the second sub area. Sub area 2 goes by the name of Development of Reading Comprehension, and it is worth approximately 27% of your total exam score. For this part of your test, you'll need to know about vocabulary development and promoting comprehension of both literary and informational texts. Let's cover a key concept from each of these areas. These are essential to know for your exam. Under vocabulary, you'll need to know about idioms. Idioms are common phrases or expressions that don't make much sense literally, but they have a figurative meaning. Examples include, "It's raining cats and dogs," or "That's the last straw," or "Cut me some slack." You can see why these phrases will be challenging for students. Using morphology to determine their meaning won't work. Instead, it's best to use context clues. Check out this excerpt. The passage talks about getting shoppers to spend even more, so the stores are squeezing more pennies out of their customers, meaning they're trying to get the customers to buy more goods. Help students understand how to use context clues using partners or whole group discussion. And it's best to only teach 1 or 2 idioms at a time so students don't get too overwhelmed. All right, let me make a long story short. It's time to move on to the comprehension. Now, I'm not pulling your leg. I'll help you wrap your head around it. Too many idioms? Sorry, couldn't help myself. On to comprehension. This is when students move from learning to read to reading to learn. Students should be taught specific comprehension skills so they can have a clear understanding of what they read. A great tool you can use to help students develop their comprehension is a graphic organizer. There are many different kinds, and they work with all different types of text. A KWL is a graphic organizer used to record what students know, what they want to know, and what they learned about a topic. Fill in the K and W portions together before reading the text, and come back to the L section after. Sequencing maps, concept maps, and Venn diagrams are all other graphic organizers that work as organizational tools for mapping the structure of a text or making connections between ideas. We've got more strategies for building reading comprehension in our study guide, so go check them out. Okay, now I'm going to use my own little sequencing chart. We finished sub areas 1 and 2. Now what's next? You guessed it, sub area 3. The last sub area for the multiple choice portion of your exam covers reading assessment and instruction, and is worth about 18% of your total score. Be prepared to see questions about best practices for reading instruction. Remember the components of reading we talked about earlier? Word analysis, fluency, comprehension? For this exam, you'll need to know how to assess these skills. You'll also need to be familiar with general assessment terms. Let's take a look at a couple now. Assessments are fair if they measure student learning appropriately. To ensure assessments are fair, teachers should focus on these 4 key points. Validity. Assessments should measure what they intend to measure. Students should be assessed on what they have been taught at the same level at which they were taught. A term related to validity that you may have heard is congruence. Instruction is congruent when teachers assure that the learning objectives outlined at the beginning of an instructional unit align with how students will be assessed. The next point to consider is freedom from bias. Test questions shouldn't offend or penalize students due to their background or culture. Considering student diversity is essential to considering potential bias in an assessment. Assessments also need to be reliable. They should produce consistent results, meaning that students should get the same score when given the same test in similar conditions. The last point is clarity of language. The language used should be at an appropriate vocabulary level and avoid slang. Students shouldn't get the question wrong just because they can't figure out what is being asked. You'll also need to be familiar with criterion reference and norm reference assessments to measure reading development. And you'll need to identify examples of informal reading assessments like oral reading fluency measures and how to use them. Now you can try to make a list of all of these assessment terms and look them up and try and get your own explanations, or you can subscribe to the 240 study guide and let us take it from there. We've got everything you need for your Foundations of Reading exam. You made it through all the selected response domains. In the next section, you'll learn how to take all the stuff you know about reading and apply it. You know, put your money where your mouth is. Not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. Back to using the idioms. My bad. Last time. Promise. Okay, here's the last sub area. Integration of knowledge and understanding, which consists of 2 constructive response questions or assignments. Together they count for 20% of your total exam score. Each one is a brief case study focused on one student. The student in the first assignment will have one weakness in the area of foundational reading skills, which includes things like phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency. The student in the second assignment will struggle with reading comprehension. This includes things like vocabulary knowledge or application of literal, inferential, or evaluative comprehension skills. So how are you going to figure out what the specific weaknesses are? The prompt will give you information about the student in form of 1 or 2 exhibits. These could be things like a running record or a transcript of a conversation with the student. Then you'll be given specific tasks to respond to. They'll likely always be the same 4. Identify strength, identify a need, select the instructional strategy or intervention, and explain the effectiveness of your strategy. We recommend writing 1 paragraph for each task and addressing the task in order in which they were given in the prompt. The last task is important, but a lot of test takers don't actually answer it correctly and they end up losing credit. Luckily, the 240 study guide includes a tips section devoted to this task. You'll learn the acronym BAM, B-A-M, which makes it easy to write the perfect answer. So BAM, just like that, we're ready to check out a practice assignment and answer it together. Here's our practice assignment. We're going to look at the foundational reading skills of Mike. Here are those same 4 tasks we went over before. Notice that the assignment asks us to use specific evidence from the text, so we'll need to note examples from the exhibits to support our answers. So here's the first exhibit. So Mike is in the 1st grade and it's the beginning of the year. He read a passage called The Cranky Crab, and we can see the errors he made in red. Our job is to analyze the errors and see if we notice a pattern. Okay, so we can see that most of the errors involve words that start with CR. It looks like he might have trouble reading words with consonant blends, but we won't know for sure until we check the second exhibit. Okay, exhibit 2 is a word analysis task, or word list Mike had to read. The teacher wrote a check mark when he read it correctly and noted his errors phonetically. Check it out. All of his errors were on words with beginning consonant blends. This definitely confirms his weakness. Now we want to make finding a weakness a strength. Wait a minute. Now that we've figured out Mike's weakness, it's time to plan what the teacher should do about it. We recommend making a sketch like this. Since the assignment asks us specifically to use evidence, we'll write a couple of key examples from the exhibit that led us to the weakness. Then we'll pick a strategy to use. There's more than 1 correct answer, but I'm going to suggest scaffolded instruction on blends using flashcards and short text. A good strategy will be both specific and scaffolded. Now, if you're worried you won't know what strategy to write about, get the 240 study guide. It's got a section that breaks down the most common weaknesses and best strategies to address them. Now back to our sketch. Here's why our strategy will work for Mike. Now all that's left to do is notate a strength of Mike's. And that's good because, as teachers, you never want to talk about a negative without adding a little positive too. Looking back at our word list, you can see that most of the words Mike got correct were sight words, so let's point that out as his strength. We've got all our answers planned out, so now all we need to do is write our response. Remember, it's best to answer each task with 1 paragraph and toggle them in order. You can get right to the point, no need for an introduction or conclusion. First, we'll identify Mike's strength with evidence. Then we'll identify his weakness with evidence to back it up. Next, we'll explain the strategy the teacher should use and exactly how they'd implement it. Finally, we explain why our strategy will improve Mike's weakness. And there you have it. So that was a quick overview of how to complete one of the CRQ assignments. Now remember, on your exam, you have a second assignment about reading comprehension skills. Now we don't have time to go over that in this video, but if you want more practice assignments, subscribe to our 240 study guide. It'll save you some time, a lot of money, and a whole lot of worry. You did it! You reviewed all 4 sub-areas. Nice work. But don't leave just yet. I've got some practice questions that you don't want to miss. Now for the questions. I already showed you a sample prompt for the constructed response questions, so let's look at some selected response questions starting with sub-area 1, Foundations of Reading Development. A teacher is conducting an assessment of her class's current phonological awareness mastery. On a prior assessment, Max was able to break down the word bacon into bay and kun. In order to demonstrate phonological awareness progress, Max should be able to add the letter E to create the word beacon, segment bacon into B and Aiken, count the individual letters in the word, list 2 or more words that start with the same beginning sound. This is the correct answer. After students can segment and blend syllables within a word, they'll be able to segment the onset and rhyme of a word. This is the next step in progression of phonological awareness. Let's take a look at another one. This is a morphemic analysis question. The words trying, writing, happening, and heating demonstrate which of the following principles? Depending on the ending letter of the root word, the addition of a suffix may impact the spelling of the root. Depending on the spelling of the root word, the pronunciation of the suffix can vary. The number of syllables in a root word determines whether the spelling is affected by the addition of a suffix. The suffix ing only affects the spelling of the root word when the root ends in a long eh sound. Now at first, I selected D, but the question feedback feature in the 240 study guide showed me that the E that is removed from write when it becomes writing was silent. So this answer about the long E sound is incorrect. So A is the correct answer. Now let's look at some questions from sub-area 2. Oh, that's the one about idioms. Break a leg. A 4th grade teacher wants to introduce idioms to her class. She projects an image of a man and woman standing under a porch while cats and dogs fall from the sky. The caption says, "Well, Jill, looks like it's raining cats and dogs again." The class discusses the definition of an idiom and uses the image to determine the true meaning of the phrase. Which of the following activities best represents a scaffolded approach to teaching the meaning of idioms? In small groups, students look at illustrations of new idioms and come up with the actual meaning. Individually, students read a teacher-selected text and highlight any idioms used by the text. With a partner, students come up with an original idiom, give its meaning, and use it in a sentence. As a group, read a paragraph that uses an idiom and discuss how to use context to determine the meaning. This way, students can use each other's background knowledge and schema to construct meanings. It's less difficult than working on their own, and it allows the teacher to walk around and monitor the discussions. Let's check out a comprehension question. A 4th grade teacher projects the following paragraph on the board and asks her students to consider how it is organized. Helen Keller was born in 1880 in Tuscumbia, Alabama, in a modest household. Keller was born without any health issues, and her parents and siblings were overjoyed. However, at only 19 months old, she was left deaf and blind by illness. Keller's parents later hired Anne Sullivan to teach Keller to read Braille. As an adult, Helen Keller went on to publish 12 books and several articles. She was the first deaf-blind person to earn a bachelor's degree. Which of the following graphic organizers best represents the organization of this paragraph? A mind map, a concept map, a Venn diagram, or a sequencing chart? This is the best one. The paragraph is organized chronologically, briefly outlining some significant parts of Helen Keller's life. This organization is best represented by a sequencing chart. Now for our last practice question. This one's from sub-area 3, about fair assessment. Mr. Sandberg's students are frustrated because they all performed well on a homework assignment, but the large majority of them failed the most recent exam. In reviewing the test questions, the students noticed they were much more complex than the homework questions. The students approached Mr. Sandberg with their concern that the test has questions they were not prepared to answer. Which of the following best describes the students' concern about the assessment? The assessment is not reliable, the assessment does not have objective measures, the assessment does not have content validity, or the assessment is not a performance-based assessment. This is the right answer. Remember that validity means the assessment measures what you want it to measure or what you taught. Mr. Sandberg's exam is not measuring what is being taught and reinforced by the homework questions. It is best practice to assess students at the same level they're being taught. The assessment isn't valid if the questions are at a higher level than what the students have been taught and what they've been practicing for homework. Now that's just a small sliver of practice questions to give you an idea of how these concepts will come out on the test. Congrats on finishing the video. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up. 240 has helped thousands of teachers pass their certification exams, and we want to add you to that number. If you're ready to take the next step, click the link in the description below and subscribe to the 240 Study Guide. It has hours of video so you can watch or listen as you please. It is test aligned so you know precisely what you need to study. And it has hundreds of practice questions so you can be sure that you're ready. And best of all, it's got a money-back guarantee. So click the link below right now to get started.